Welcome back to RFL. We just heard from State Senator David Carlucci on the big ugly bill, that last big catch-all bill at the end of the session, and all the other unresolved issues in Albany. Wanted to get our roundtable tonight to weigh in. Jeannie Zaino is with us, professor of political science at Iona College, professor of campaign management at NYU. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Michael Tobman returns, independent political consultant. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And Jessica Proud, Republican strategist and expert with the November team. You were the spokeswoman for the Dan Donovan campaign, the successful House campaign in Staten Island. Thank you all for being here. So you heard the conversation with David Carlucci. General sense is that there's going to be a lot of short-term extenders on a lot of these key issues and not a lot of long-term resolution. Michael, what do you see? The state Senate's gaveling in tomorrow to talk about rent control. What do you see being on the agenda? Do you think there's room to get more done than just that?
There are issues that have to happen. Rent control, 421A in terms of New York City's development, economy, the future of that, but then issues like the scholarship or education tax credit, which in full disclosure I'm working in support of, and I have since 2006 when it was in Governor Pataki's last budget. A lot of these things, I don't know that we've ever had a session where so many big issues and so many big policies were left until the last minute as a consequence of new leadership both in the Senate and in the Assembly, and some fear and paralysis, depending on if you're reading Fred Dicker, it's paralysis, or everybody else is just fear, because of investigations into Albany and state government. So there are things that have to get done, and then there are things that should get done, and they're going to link the things that should get done, I would suggest the tax credit, with the things that have to get done, like mayoral control of the schools, tax cap issues, 421A, and rent control.
Jessica, how much do you see of the stalemate in Albany right now being political paralysis and everybody sort of afraid and looking over their shoulder? How much of it is just ideological differences between the two parties on what to do about these issues?
Well, some of it is that, for sure. I mean, the Senate has traditionally always been against loosening the rent vacancy decontrol and the rent regulations, and the Assembly is always, every year, fights for it. You do have a different dynamic because you have different leaders negotiating now. You have Senator Flanagan, who's been in Albany a very long time and is very savvy. You have Carl Hastie, who is getting all these negative stories about him, you know, scandal after scandal. So I think there is part of it is that there is a reluctance to do anything that appears to be pay to play, and the other piece of it is just your typical end of session ideological differences, but mostly it's horse trading. I mean, everything's on the table until it isn't.
I'll jump in and say that there is this tendency now to criminalize politics and to criminalize and to think something furtive is going on, even though if it's just the usual deal making and it's the usual mechanics of sausage making in government. I think criminalizing the regular day-to-day politics of deal-making and getting things done and half a loaf and good enough, all of a sudden is seen as somehow criminal. And I think that's impacting a lot of thinking.
You know, Jeannie, I kept thinking all day today, every time we have one of these scandals, the Silver scandal or the Skello scandal, everybody comes home, they talk to their constituents, and then they're like, okay, we got to take some action as soon as we go back to Albany. It doesn't seem like that happens on an issue-by-issue basis, at least as much. Or maybe it's just not as effective. Like, lawmakers come home from Albany and it doesn't seem like they're in any great hurry to get anything done, or they can't find that middle ground. There does seem to be a difference in how the public responds.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I have to say that I do think this is more about paralysis than I do it's ideological. If you look at the difference where the Senate and the Assembly are in terms of rent control, 421A, they are not that far apart. They could come to an agreement, mayoral control of schools. Mm-hmm. They've done that in the past. But I think what has happened here is that you have this fear, you have this paralysis, and you have new leaders. You know, Carl Hastie did make something of a deal with the devil when he came in promising to be a different kind of leader. And now, how do you get things done in Albany if you're not going to crack that whip and you don't have the ability to do it? So he's standing there and can't get his members to come with him on some pretty basic stuff that we expect should usually get done. So I think there's a whole combinations that just have ground this thing to a halt. And I have to say, what I think is going to happen is they're going to do the extenders and they're going to try, but big things they wanted to do, criminal justice reform, the DREAM Act, those are not going to get done. And those are big losses for New York residents, that those things aren't even being debated, let alone addressed by the end of the session.
Dominic, as much as we criticize three men in the room, this is what three men in the room are for. They're for ironing all this stuff out and getting it passed through both chambers. If this doesn't happen, how much of that is a repudiation on three men in the room, and the particular three men in the room in this case?
Well, I think I agree with a little bit of every argument that's been made thus far. But I just want to, Michael, I just want to go back to your original point of business as it used to be done before. And perhaps we should be looking at that now in terms of maybe things shouldn't be exactly the way they were before. That's not to say that, I'm trying to say that maybe some of those things didn't pass the muster test, if you will, in terms of what's legal and what's not legal. And I think Hasty, to your point, has a serious problem. I mean, he's got to be able to your point, whip his members into shape, and he's got some serious problems. And so you got new leadership, you got a governor whose poll numbers are down, let's not forget that. They're still solid, but Cuomo is not standing on firm ground as he once was, and so I think it's going to be extender city and not much is going to get done.
And let's remember, there's no ethics reform happening either.
Right.
The one thing we really probably need in this state is also not going to happen, and we'll be back here again next year, undoubtedly.
But to Dominic's point, I mean, really, the governor in the past, this year is markedly different because the governor in the past has sort of, it's like herding cats a little bit, but bringing everybody together to the table. And a lot of that has been done by fear of huge amounts of money that he's had, fear of strong poll numbers, which isn't the case this year. But even on the education tax credit, I mean, he has gone all out running ads and everything. And, that's an issue I definitely support. But he has thrown a lot of political capital behind it, and it still hasn't gotten done. So I'm surprised by how much the members of his own party are even willing to push back on him this year.
It's also the issues it's around. If it's not, criminal justice reform is important, and professional law enforcement unions and the prosecutors are stakeholders, but it's not the third rail hot issue that education is. And the teachers unions were so opposite the governor in his recent re-election campaign, tacitly supporting a primary challenge from Zephyr Teachout, not being with him in the general election, and there are consequences for that. So you have a governor whose attitude is, I don't need to take your calls, we don't have relationships, I'm going to push these issues, and members are going to come along, we'll see. But this is continued fallout also from the re-election campaign, primary and general.
Well, if there's any upside to the delays in Albany, it's that it plays out very, very slowly, so we can tell everybody at home, tune in tomorrow, because we'll be continuing our coverage as we wait for Albany to get something or anything done. We're going to take a break on RFO. When we come back, we'll switch to national politics. As President Obama gets ready to head to Charleston on Friday, we'll look at how the tragedy there is changing the national conversation.